Hello, good evening, people. Hope you all are enjoying your Corona vacations. I just thought of I thought to have this online session today because the ANC wanted me to conduct a session on some sort of a media that is called what you call as the online presentation. So that is what I've intended to come through YouTube online because we don't have we have sort of open source softwares, but those are not having enough quality to broadcast you online. So my today the lesson, as I've shared it in your uh, YouTube channel, is all about you know uh, the international trade barriers, right? So whenever we are discussing on the international trade, we were discussed about the competitive and relative advantages and uh, the theories, the basic theories in international trades, and so on and so forth. So I'm expecting to conduct this session for 20 minutes odd time because I'll be explaining you whatever the necessary theoretical explanations in this during this presentation. And of course, if you have any concerns, you can ask me any questions through the WhatsApp chat sessions, or else you can send me the mails about the whatever the clarifications to clarify the areas that whatever you have. So we'll move to the session. We'll move to the lesson. I've already uploaded this slide to your Moodle database that is called ANC Moodle. So today the topic is all about barriers and constraints in international trade. Right. In this lesson, we are going to discuss about the international, the lesson outcomes are define the concept of international trade barriers, and to understand the nature of the trade barriers, what sort of trade barriers are there, what we really mean by the trade barriers, and how they are implemented in the governments, and the different sort of societies and economies, right? And we are going to see what are the reasons and objectives for the implementation of all these international trade barriers, as well as we are going to see the types of the international trade barriers, which differs with the economies, right? Which differs with the countries, and you know uh, it may differ with the particular economical cycles, right? So fine. And also we are going to discuss about the advantages of international trade barriers to the the home countries, right? Because by looking at this topic, it says that's a bit of constraint, right? International trade barriers, those are the barriers for the international trade. Okay. So what do we really mean by the international trade barriers, and why are we need this? Actually, the reason, basically, the trade barriers are so many sort of constraints to the international trade, right? Um, the trade barriers are like the government introduced these things, right? Government introduces time to time. There can be different types of trade barriers which are implemented and introduced by the governments. Of course, these are like sort of restrictions, which are man-made restrictions, right, towards the international trade. Right? There are so many reasons for these international types of what you call the international trade barriers, right? So we'll first get to know about the definitions of these international trade barriers, right? Trade barriers are government introduced restrictions on international trades which generally decreases overall economic efficiency. Here we just not, we are not going to discuss about a particular country. We are not going to talk about just a sort of a home country market, right? We are here considering about the international trades. So the trade which are happening between the countries. So which will decrease, in some instances, which will decreases the economical efficiency between the countries. Fine. And we can also define this thing as man-made obstacles to free movement of goods between the different countries. Yes, of course, because we, being a nation, let's say Sri Lanka, is having an agreement of exporting some of the products. Now we are the producer, right? We being Sri Lanka, we are the producer, and we have an agreement with the India to export some of the commodities from Sri Lanka, right? For them, of course, it's an import, right? Where they are, getting some commodities from our country. So we are the people to produce it, okay? So that is, of course, if we are sending them without any hazards, without any restrictions, without any government intervention, that is called free trade, right? We are free to trade with them. Is you don't have any restrictions in between two countries. You don't have any sort of what we known as the blocks, right? Trade blocks or trade restrictions or trade restraints. But with the intervention of the government, the man-made obstacles will be imposed over those types of trades. There are so many purposes, as I've told you, but that is like imposed on artificial restrictions. Like basically, those are artificial restrictions, right? There's nothing called natural restrictions. There are natural restrictions like, let's say, tsunamis and the disasters, like some of the storms and things like that. So those things are there. But of course, these are man-made artificial restrictions on trading between the countries, right? So we also can define in that way as well. Fine. So what is the nature of a trade barrier? I'm just giving you a summary. I mean, I'm just summarizing all these the subtopics of these uh, international trade barriers. Of course, if you have any clarifications, if you do have any problems related to these subject matters, you can of course ask from me, right? Okay, you're open to ask, right? We'll move. Nature of trade barriers. So, whatever the trade barriers, we have to look at all these trade barriers in different perspectives. Let's say, what is the nature of these trade barriers, right? So, what are the natures of? So, they arises from the rules and regulations governing by the particular home country's government. Let's say, as an example, if like the first example I've told, right? When the Sri Lanka is exporting some of the commodities to India, if the India government wants to restrict them, of course, they can use these trade barriers to restrict or refrain or to mitigate, or let's say to discourage some of the export activities from Sri Lanka, right? So the home country, let's say the home country in that case is the country who imports that particular product. Let's say that is India, right? So all these rules, or let's say the regulation or the trade barriers, can be implemented by home country, India, host country, in the sense that the country who produces these types of products, right? That is Sri Lanka, and also if there's any intermediary, right? So let's say some of the countries like UK and USA, we cannot directly export some of the products. There are specific types of products, right? We cannot export them without having an intermediary. Let's say there's an intermediary from China to I'll get an example of importing gem powders, right? Gem compounding powders. So for that, the intermediary is China. To get those, actually, we here in Sri Lanka we have the minerals and compounds in Sri Lanka. So we can ask the Chinese people to buy them, or let's say that can either to they can either to buy, or even they can do the intermediary part, just the intermediary part, by receiving that commodity and sending back to the USA, UK. So that sort of intermediaries are there, right? So the governments are not impose trade barriers on exports. The next thing is they are not going to what do you call impose some of the trade barriers or trade restrictions or the exports. Why? Now, as we be in Sri Lanka, let's say we are third largest. We are the third largest apparel manufacturer of the world, right? We are the third largest manufacturer of the apparels in the world. So we don't have any idea to refrain from exporting those apparels, because in a circumstance that is concerned as the major income source of Sri Lanka. So we don't want to restrict them, or we don't want to discourage them, right? So we are not going to impose any sort of a tax, or let's say any sort of a trade barrier on this exporting of the apparels, right? And we are just that is basically exports will give you that is a source of an income, right? So then when it comes to the imports, Of course, we have to. Why is that? There are so many reasons, right? Okay, we look on that. Now, by imposing all these trade barriers, the objectives are different, right? It may differ from country to country or an economy to economy. Anyway, the reason is to impose, the reasons to impose all these trade barriers to protect the domestic industries from the foreign goods. Now, as an example, let's say what has happened to the domestic industries called, let's say, um, now we have our own car manufacturer in Sri Lanka that is called Micro. But when it comes to the Japanese companies like Toyota, uh, let's say the European companies like BMW, right? What has happened to our domestic industry? Is it really doing good? I mean, though the Micro is having the capacity to produce the whatever the automotives, which are, even they have the capacity to give the sufficient commodities to the domestic market, but still they cannot do it. Why is that? Because there are so many competitors in the market. Who are they? They're from different countries, right? They're from different markets. And if they are getting those types of market, let's say that is from one is from European market, one is from of course from Japanese market, and let's say one is from India as well, right? Now these Maruti Suzuki, Maruti Alto, all these cars are coming from India, right? So we cannot actually, we though we are having the capacity, but still the local industry is discouraged by allowing the foreign companies to come into Sri Lanka to sell their commodities, right? But now look at the impact of increasing the tax proportion on. Of course, in Sri Lanka, you cannot afford a micro Geely car at a cost of 400,000, right? It's impossible. But when it comes to, let's say, if they like if the government is making necessary arrangements to increase the VAT rate, or let's say increase the import taxes of the European as well as the Japanese cars, and also the cars from India, of course, what will be the impact? Definitely, the people will refraining, or let's say people will, in some case, the people, those who actually want to buy a European car will go for that. But still, a person who wants to buy a car won't go for European or a Japanese or an Indian brand, right? If they're really promoting well the Geely, micro Geely as a domestic car, so they will buy it. Why? Because the tariff is so high to afford, right? Let's say in Sri Lanka, it's almost all about 340% of tariffs are added to the automobile sector in importing all these cars, right? So it's more than the car would cost around 5 lakhs. So ultimately, that would cost around let's say 4.5 million or 5 million, right? So that is the story. So this is the case, right? Huge tax imposements, right? But of course, we should have think about increasing the tax and the tariff imposements, and improving the trade barriers in importing all these cars. Okay, that is to protect our domestic industries, right? The second objective is to promote the new industries and research and development activities by providing the home market for domestic industries. Now, by allowing the foreign marketeers to come into Sri Lanka, that will not allow the Sri Lankan or the domestic people to do their business. I mean, they cannot grow their businesses because there are so many competitors, right? With their capacity, we cannot even think of competing with them, because they are having so much of financial capacity. If the government has made the necessary actions to refrain from bringing them to this particular, let's say, the Sri Lankan economy, the people those who are expecting cars, the people those who are expecting automotives, they don't have any choice, right? So this the through the trade barriers, the government expects to promote new industries, right? New domestic industries in a country, as well as in some instance we can say the government expects to conserve some of the foreign exchange reserves, right? Let's say in economics, you may have heard of a thing called net export income, right? In Sri Lanka, it's clear we don't have that much of net export income because why? Our imports are greater than the exports. To be frank with you, that is the truth, right? Because most of the time we are getting some, by allowing you all, right, the new world people, right, the people those who are living in the 21st century. So you all are trying to bring some small commodities, like let's say from whatever the online sites available. Those are coming from another country, right? So all these material, all these commodities are taken into the consideration when we do the national accounts of whenever we are calculating on the imports, right? So a huge amount of imports are happening, and when it compares with the exports, that whatever we do as a country, we are not actually doing good, right? We don't do sort of very good exports. I don't know whether I'm receiving some of the messages from y'all. For the moment, we'll also go for this as well. Okay, so one is asking, actually, this is quite interesting, right? One is asking to turn on the live chat. So definitely, I will make it by next thing, which means day after tomorrow we will be having another session. So I will be making the necessary arrangements to turn on the live chats, right? Okay, Christine, I will do definitely. Please do. Yes, I will do it. Okay, so at the same time, I will moving back to the session, right? So that is to conserve the foreign exchange rate reserves or exchange reserves, right? So which means by reducing the number of imports, of course, we can protect our local currency, right? I will give you a very good explanation on that, right? And uh, yes, so right. So, and the next one is to maintain the favorable balance of payment. Yes, balance of payment is also another factor which we are going to measure the efficiency of our economy. So, the favorable balance of payments will also make, um, by restricting the imports, of course, you can maintain a favorable balance of payment, which means your income of exports will be greater than the expenses that whatever you incurred for your imports, right? Right. So these are some of the objectives of imposing trade barriers. So we'll move further, right? And the next one is to protect the national economy from dumping by the other countries with surplus production. Now, if you can remember, during our first 2 days, we discussed about uh, uh, the countries which are having the competitive advantage or the comparative advantage has to produce, or a country or countries have to produce uh, the productions, whatever they do have the competitive advantage, right? That is a theory. So let's say being a huge manufacturer, considerable manufacturer of apparels to the world, if Sri Lanka is having some of the excess productions, not the factory outs, right? These are excess productions. Of course, other than the countries that we export these products, we can think about the other countries as well. Why? Because keeping all these things, when it comes to apparels, right? Keeping all these, materials with us, it won't be effective, right? We can generate some of the income through those types of, we call them as debris, right? We don't want them actually. That is an excess or a surplus of production. So we can send them to another country, right? Let's say a country like uh, Canada will buy some of the products which will be considered as very, what do you call, the apparels from Sri Lanka, which are considered as a surplus of production, right? They will buy them at a least cost. Why? Our intention is to throw these away because we don't want this production, right? because we don't want to, some of the brands are there, some of the companies are there. They don't want to become inferior brands by selling them in the local markets. Other than that, they can go for the non-existent, let's say, the new international markets, right? By selling all these commodities in the international markets, they will anyway they will try to the companies will try to push them into those particular markets, even though the people don't want to buy, but because considering price as a biggest factor, so they will give a cheaper price. The manufacturer will decide on a cheaper price, and they try to push them into the new international markets. So what will be the impact? By getting all these debris into their economies, right? They're going to, let's say, though they have some of the, let's say, let's assume that they are having some of the apparel manufacturers in their country as well, but those are a bit expensive, right? They are very uh, quality and all these, material, what do you call, the quality of the product is still similar, right? Because we are sending some of the commodities which are produced for the premium countries, right? Right. So then the premium markets, fine. So then when it comes to this scenario, the though the people like though the people don't have the what do you call, the need of buying this thing, but still they don't have the need, but still they will buy because of what? Because of the less price. So what is happening to their home country markets, home country producers? Home country producers may deprive about the productions, and they will discourage to do the production because the people are tend to buy the products which are coming from a foreign country, right? You will lose the economic efficiency through doing that in a home country market, right? So by imposing a trade barrier, let's say Canada has imposed a trade barrier to Sri Lanka in sending all these debris stocks to their market, right? Which doesn't like it will really give an impact on the Sri Lankan, extra generation of income. When it comes to the trade barriers, we cannot, push them because the government is intervened, right? So they have intervened, so we cannot do anything. So what we can do is only to, withdraw our products from that particular market, right? So that is how the governments can, protect the national economy from dumping the international garbage into their, considering them as trash, right? Then the next one is encourage domestic production in the domestic market. So which will allow, definitely, which will allow the domestic people to produce more in their domestic markets because they don't have surpluses, they don't have the dump storages, right? So they can do their own production and counteract trade barriers imposed by the countries. You can use these trade barriers to fight with your rival countries, right? Ekateka, that is what we call, right? You can do some of the restrictions, like let's say if the India is restricting some of the products from Sri Lanka, you can also restrict as being a government. We can restrict as being an economy. We can restrict some of the productions from India, unwanted productions, right? Okay, and also mobilize additional revenue by imposing heavy duties on imports. By discouraging all these heavy imports through giving high sort of heavy taxes and tariffs over those imports, we can mobilize an additional income to the government, because basically the main source of the government income is all about taxes, right? Whatever the tax paid by the civilians of that particular economy, let's say, right, from that particular nation. Also, by imposing another type of a tariff, they can collect another sum to their reserves in government, right? So these are the basic objectives of imposing trade barriers to the international trade. Fine. So then, now today we are going to discuss about the types of trade barriers, right? Because there are basically two types of trade barriers which we can categorize as tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers, right? When it comes to the tariff barriers, of course, we are here today. We are not going to discuss about the non-tariff barriers. Some may say, Ammoza, thank you very much, right? Is that? Yes. We are not going to touch on the non-tariff barriers. But of course, during this year, Corona vacation, we are going to discuss about the tariff barriers. What do we really mean by tariff barriers? What do we really mean by tariff, right? So tariff is something which is very similar to a tax, but still that is collected at the point where you will receive some of the commodities from another country, right? Let's say a tariff barrier is a very, it's a levy collected on the goods and when they enter into a domestic tariff area through customs. Now, let's say if a ship has come to the dock of, let's say, the Colombo dockyard, right? That won't be subject to a tax or a tariff, right? Because it's in the Colombo ports. Once it has come into Sri Lankan territory, let's say, once it has passed through the customs of Sri Lanka, that will subject to a tariff, which will add another value because it's an import, right? Obviously, it's an import, so which will add another value on that to discourage this type of import. Right? There are various methods and various intentions of imposing all these trade tariffs, right? So a tariff barrier is a levy collected on goods when they enter into a domestic tariff area through customs, right? Simply, right? There are non-tariff barriers as well as, we will be discussing this later, right? Quota systems, import licensing, consular formalities, preferential treatment through trading blocks and customs regulations, state trading, as well as foreign exchange regulations and health and safety measures, right? So we will be discussing all these things later, right, in our next session. Right. So tariffs, of course, refers to the duties imposed on internationally traded commodities when they cross national boundaries and may be in the form of heavy taxes or custom duties on imports. Right. Now, some of the commodities are there. Let's say a country like USA, if it imports from USA, the commodity is coming through USA to let's say the UAE ports, right? Let's say some ports nearby Arabic Sea. Then after to Sri Lanka. Let's say this is the this is the way it arrives to Sri Lanka. So under that, the tariffs can also be imposed over those commodities because there's no any way to come to Sri Lanka other than that way, right? In some of the what do you call some of the ports, they will be charged for tariffs or they will be considered for the tariffs, right? Okay, so tariff simply refers to the duties imposed on internationally traded commodities when they cross national boundaries and maybe in the form of heavy taxes or custom duties on imports. Okay. A tariff barrier is a levy collected on the goods, as I told you earlier. That is, levy collected in a particular sort of a good or a sort of a commodity on the domestic tariff area through the customs. And the aim of the tariff, the aim of the tariff is just to raise the prices of imported goods in domestic markets, reduce their demand, and thereby discourage the imports. Right? It's one way of it's a one of an objective which we have discussed in our objective list of objectives, right? Right. So there are natures of tariffs, or let's say there are so many types of tariffs, right? With the basis of their imposement. Let's say the basis of origin and destination of goods crossing the national boundaries. Let's say there are three types of, right? Whenever the product is what do you call arrived to a destination that will be tariffed under the national boundaries they are crossing, right? So let's say one thing is export duty. Now you may wonder why this one has previously told us no, there's nothing called export duty. No one is going to tax the exports. Yes, of course, no one is going to tax. But let's say as an example, in an event where we do have like this is not actually a tax, right? This is a tariff, right? It's a duty and it's a levy. Where, let's say, we are in a conservation of our natural resources. Let's say we are, day by day we are talking about our dolomites, right? So if somebody is trying to import all these dolomites, that will affect Sri Lanka in a bad way, because we will be, sending our minerals to the countries and we are getting the money out of it, but still we are not reserving or we are not conserving our resources. So because of that, of course, you can impose an export levy on those types of resources, right? Of course, you cannot impose some of the export duties on the finished goods, right? These are, of course, imposed over the semi-finished, or let's say the raw materials, right? Can be some of unfinished gems, right? Some of the natural resources, right? So export duty, that is by the country of the origin with an intention of conservation of resources, the particular export duty will be imposed on the particular production, right? Okay, or let's say material. Okay, and the next one is import duty. It is very common, right? Whenever the countries are importing some of the commodities to that particular home country, the production which is prepared, or let's say the produced by the foreign country, will be subject to an import duty, right? At the moment that you are receiving the goods will be subject to an import duty, which will be taxed, right? Imposed on a commodity originating in another country by the country for which the product is designated, right? And transit duty. Okay, this is very cool, right? Imposed on a commodity when it crosses the national frontier between the originating country and the country which is consigned to. Now, let's say in an event where do have some of the trade agreements between the countries, of course, you can think about this transit duty, right? Some of the, of course, there are so many agreements between the countries. Yes, in transit duty, what will happen is some of the countries where they do the production, and when the productions are reached to that particular country, because of crossing their borders, some of the duties will be imposed on that particular commodities, right? Those are called as the transit duty. Okay, we'll move further. So this is one category of, that is the basis of origin and destinations of the good crossing the national boundaries, right? Then the second one, that is basis of the quantification of tariffs. Quantification in the sense that is a measurement of the tariffs, right? So there are again three types. Okay, so the first one is a specific duty. Specific in the sense there's a flat sum, right? If you are receiving sort of, there's nothing called quota, right? Let's say physical units, right? Per car, you will charge 340% of import tariff. That is that, right? It can be Mercedes Benz, it can be an Audi, it can be Toyota Corolla, whatever you are imported. So those will be taxed under a specific rate of duty, right? Per unit. So that is called specific duty. Then you have ad valorem duty. That is called, that is basically a percentile. That is a second variety of, the second way of charging some of the tariffs for your, quantification based on the quantification, right? So ad valorem duty. So that is imposed basically as a percentile or percentage on the value of the commodity import. Let's say if you are importing a value, let's say a commodity worth of 50 million, that will be taxed under 5% of the total commodity. That is 5% into the 50 million into 5%, right? Then the third one is the compound. That is a mixology of these two, specific duty and ad valorem duty, right? So it's a compound duty when the commodity is subject to both specific and ad valorem duty. So it's a combination of the aforesaid two, right? Hope you guys got an idea about this, right? Right. Of course, if you have any concerns, let me know through email. And definitely, as you've requested me, so I will be definitely allowing you to make the online comments from next session onwards, right? Sorry about it. I will, I have to make my apologies, right? Okay. So the third one, actually, on the basis of purpose they serve, right? So there are so many purposes. No, I've told you, no, there are so many purposes why these governments are imposing taxes and tariffs, right? Uh, the first one is the revenue duty, right? Based on, with an intention of earning some money to the government, they will impose some of the duties, or let's say they are levies, right? Or we'll say them as taxes, or tariffs, sorry, right? Those are in a way of earning some of the revenues, right? That is called revenue duty. The second one is protective duty. Okay, the next objective, right? By imposing tariffs, what they expect is to protect the home country or domestic market, domestic suppliers, right? Protective duty to protect the home country industries, discourage the imports from the foreign country. And the third one is anti-dumping duty. That is also called, as I told you, anti-dumping is to mitigate the risk of dumping the quantities sales at a lower price. I told you, some of the countries are trying to give the excess or surplus quantities to another country, to giving your baby to another, right? So that is one. So anti-dumping duty is imposed to mitigate the risk of receiving. Okay, I forgot to tell you. Okay, don't touch your nose and face and things like that while you are doing your presentations because it may get corona. So use the sanitizer bottles as well, right? So moving to the subject, uh, anti-dumping duty is there. So then the fourth one is on the basis of trade relations, the relations between the countries, right? Single column tariffs, some of the tariffs are imposed. Okay, I'm receiving some of. Okay, thank you, Christine, for your uh, comment. Like Dhammika Pereira got garbage. No, he was making money out of it, right? So this is a special point, right? So okay, despite of the topic, let's say Dhammika Pereira's garbage deal, right? It was a deal, right? It's a crime actually. If a civilian has done it, the government would have caught him under the court of law, and it will be considered as it may have considered as a criminal case, right? So uh, since this is the second wealthiest person in Sri Lanka, that's fine. So when it comes to Dhammika Pereira's garbage incident, of course, he wanted to make some money out of it because normally the Japan and China, the countries like them, the highly industrial countries, right? Uh, those are like dumping their garbages to the other countries, or let's say the third world countries, or let's say the developing countries like Sri Lanka and India. Uh, to they are dumping them not just because of dumping. That is not the intention of dumping their garbages into our countries, but they say that if you do have some of the those are the anyway surpluses, right? If you have any technical ability, or let's say if you're having any technology to produce or generate the electricity, of course you can buy them. Yes. What happens in the sense now, some of the industrialized countries are dumping them free of charge because those are being surpluses, right? At the same time, Dhammika receives all these commodities, right? And then he tried to make the money out of how he will send those commodities. Now he's not going to import all these things into the country because it will be taxed, no, right? They've been kept at the Colombo ports. If can you remember, they were kept in the terminals of Colombo ports, which are operationalized by Atlantis as well as the Advantis transport companies or the logistic companies and the logistic terminals, which are owned by Dhammika Pereira, right? So they won't be taxed, right? That is called re-exportation, right? So you are bringing some of the commodities from, you are importing some of the commodities from another country, and you try to re-export them, right? Without or with processing all these commodities, right? Fine. Now, what he has done in the sense, he took all these commodities and he bared all these things in Sri Lanka finally, because he actually, being a business personality, some most of the business personalities in Sri Lanka, they are not going to care about these or corporate social responsibilities and things like that, because they are doing just number crunching, right? They're not going to do it, even though they tell, right? Donation of 70 million is fine, yes, I know, right? That should be appreciated. And the bad side of it's this, right? Black money, where they are going to transfer those kunu commodities to another country in a way of giving raw materials to generate electricity. So he will get some money out of it from the country, as well as just because of dumping the garbages from the other economies, they will pay money to the Amiga Pereira. So he is getting two-way income through importing and exporting the commodities. Now I think that you can understand the concept of Kuno exporting strategy, right? Okay, so fine. So coming back to the lesson, this is the okay. Don't right. I can see some of your faces. I can assume some. I can imagine some of your faces are like, you know, that's fine, right? Just we are passing about 41 minutes, right? Within 45 or 46 minutes, I'll go to conclude this session, right? So on the basis of trade relations, we have single column, double column, and triple column tariffs, right? Single column, of course, we are having a single rate, which is common for all the commodities, whatever we receive, based on the type of the commodity. Let's say if it is a car, if it's a car ship of cars, so that will be taxed under one rate. If it is ship of let's say not probably the crude containers, but of course some of the technical equipments like let's say the computers, right? The ships which carry the computer machines will be taxed under one rate, right? Not the ships, but the commodities, right? Okay. Those are from the different countries, right? Those can be from different countries or maybe can from the same country. And double column tariff is all about two rates for the duties. Two rates of duties are fixed on all or some commodities. Some commodities are taxed, and while the others are not, or else those are taxed under different rates, right? That is called double column tariff. Triple column, of course, there are general tariffs, international tariffs, as well as the preferential tariffs. Now, if you are having some of the trade agreements between two types of, let's say, two economies, you can think of preferential tariffs. I will give you a descriptive explanation on this. I will add it as a PDF, right? So you can read and understand. Okay, because we are losing our time, right? Most of your faces are not good, right? So because of that, I'm moving to the my last. Okay, thank you very much, sir. No, right. So we are moving to. Don't be, my wife is here. I'm doing this from home, so that is I'm always smiling. Fine. So anyway, advantages of tariffs barriers to the home countries. Of course, there are so many advantages, as I've told you. Again, I'm going to tell you about the objectives of this tariff barriers in a way which it can be affected as an advantage to the home country. Imports from abroad are discouraged. Yes, we know that. Protection is given to the home country industries. Yes, we know that. Consumption of foreign goods is reduced, of course, which will uh, influence and which will encourage the domestic production. Tariff brings a substantial revenue, yes, to the government. Tariff aims to reduce the deficit of balance of payments and the balance of trade between the countries and economies, right? So these are the good facet, good in the sense, anyway, it's good. So the advantages of tariff barriers. Right. So if you do have any concerns, you can mail me some of your concerns, or even you can message now. Most of you all are, not the most, right? All the people have been, given with a Moodle access, so you have the Moodle access and you can chat with me during the chat sessions. Fine, I'm receiving some of the messages from y'all. That's fine. So, oh my goodness, thank you for sending all these. I don't know who's chocolate nigga, but still I'm getting okay, a new shirt. Okay, fine. Thank you for the comments. Right, always being new. I'm fine. That is what we call as updating, right? Thank you very much, right? Being a marketer, I should have to update, right? And Christine, my wife is doing very good, right? Thank you for asking, and hope you all are also doing good, right? So anyway, good. Okay, fine. So I don't know who's this lion face. He's telling like nice joke. Fine. Right. Okay. So whatever. If you do have any concerns, let me know through email, or you can send me some of the messages through Moodle, and of course I will make them available. Like the online comment will be switched on in your next session, and I will hopefully I'll send a message to this same World Economy and Contractual Relationship Forum. Uh, uh, within today itself, at the time, whichever. Nelka, thank you. Your happy faces, right? Thanks. So, I'll be sending you some of the one messages. I mean, one email, or else I will send this the message to this forum. So you can refer that particular link, and you can come online, and we'll be having another chat during this week. So you hope you almost all have enjoyed the session, even though this is very new. I don't know whether the other lecturers are doing in this way. I don't know, because we may, probably we all are using different types of online platforms, of course. But this is a very convenient platform for me because I have to just share. That is why I'm using this YouTube. So if you guys, I think, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being on time. I've seen some of you were working on time, so good to see that. Of course, panic in these. Don't be panicking these. I would say during this vacation. And if you have any persons or personnel known to coronaviruses, just please inform the PHI and all the authorities. And my wife is looking at me, except doing this session, why are you telling all these things here? Because you all being my stakeholders, and especially my students and my you know my loving brothers and sisters, I should say, right? So I should say that, and get protective measures as well, and be home, be safe, and stay safe. Okay. Thank you very much. Hope you all enjoy the session. Thank you very much. Thanks. Good night.